The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and clinical as the October wind rattling my kitchen windows. We regret to inform you that your application for the emergency relief pilot position has been declined. While your experience is impressive, we require pilots under age 55 for insurance purposes. I crumpled the paper and tossed it toward the trash can, missing by a mile. At 62, my aim wasn't what it used to be either, apparently. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Damn fools, I muttered, refilling my coffee mug with hands that were steadier than most 30-year-olds I'd trained. But steady hands don't matter when your birth certificate says you're past your prime. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I've been flying for 43 years. I've navigated through Category 5 hurricanes, landed on aircraft carriers in 30-foot swells, and evacuated civilians from war zones most people can't pronounce. I've got more flight hours than some airlines and enough certifications to wallpaper my bathroom. But none of that mattered to AeroRelief Services when they saw my age on the application. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being rejected by the same company I'd helped establish 15 years ago, back when my gray hair was still brown and my wrinkles were just laugh lines. I'd flown their first humanitarian mission to Haiti after the earthquake, navigating through conditions that sent younger pilots running for cover. Now they wouldn't even interview me. I walked to my living room window and stared out at the small airfield beyond my backyard. My Cessna 180 Esperanza sat tied down on the tarmac like a forgotten promise. The single-engine aircraft had been my companion through countless adventures. Her blue and white paint job now faded, but her engine still purring like a contented cat. We'd been grounded together for 3 months now, ever since my commercial license renewal got tangled up in new age restrictions and medical requirements that seemed designed to push older pilots into retirement. The phone rang, jarring me from my brooding. The caller ID showed my daughter's number. "Morning, Mia," I answered, forcing cheer into my voice. "Mom, have you been watching the weather reports?" Carmen's voice carried that worried edge I'd been hearing more often lately, the tone adult children use when they think their parents are becoming fragile. "What about them?" "Hurricane Delilah. It's strengthening faster than they predicted. They're saying it might hit the Gulf Coast as a Category 4. I walked to my computer and pulled up the weather radar. The satellite image showed a massive spiral of white clouds, deceptively beautiful from space, but carrying the power to level cities. The storm's eye was perfectly formed, a sign of a mature and dangerous system. "It's still 3 days out," I said, studying the projected path. "Plenty of time for people to evacuate." "That's just it, Mom. They're predicting it'll strengthen to a Category 5 and make landfall somewhere between Mobile and Pensacola. You know what that area is like, all those barrier islands and remote fishing communities. Some of those places can only be reached by boat or small aircraft." I knew the area well. I'd flown relief missions there after Hurricane Ivan, navigating between barrier islands where families lived in houses built on stilts, connected to the mainland by bridges. That would be the first casualties of any major storm. The geography was treacherous shallow waters full of debris, shifting sandbars, and areas where even experienced boat captains feared to venture during normal weather, much less in hurricane conditions. "The authorities will handle it," I said, though something in my gut told me it wouldn't be that simple. "Will they? Mom, you remember Katrina. You remember how many people got left behind because the big relief organizations couldn't reach them or wouldn't risk it." She was right, and we both knew it. I'd seen it happen too many times: bureaucratic delays, insurance concerns, and safety protocols that prioritized equipment over human lives. When disasters struck remote areas, it often fell to private pilots and local volunteers to fill the Gaps, flying missions the big organizations deem too risky. I've got to go, Mia. I'll call you later. Mom, I'm not thinking of anything. I'm just an old woman drinking coffee and watching the weather. But as I hung up, I was already mentally calculating flight times and fuel requirements. My fingers drummed against the kitchen table in a rhythm I recognized, the same nervous energy I'd felt before every dangerous mission of my career. Spent the rest of the morning monitoring weather reports and emergency broadcasts. By noon, the situation was escalating rapidly. Hurricane Delilah had intensified to a Category 4 with sustained winds of 145 miles per hour, and meteorologists were predicting it would reach Category 5 status before landfall. Mandatory evacuation orders were issued for coastal areas from Louisiana to the Florida Panhandle, but evacuations take time, and not everyone can or will leave. I'd seen it before: elderly residents who refused to abandon homes they'd lived in for decades, families with disabled members who couldn't travel easily, fishermen, and marina owners who stayed behind to protect their livelihoods. And then there were always the people who simply got caught off guard, who waited too long, or whose escape routes got cut off by rising water and falling trees. My phone rang again. This time it was Jake Morrison, a former student of mine who ran a charter service out of Mobile. Elena, you seeing this storm? Hard to miss it. I'm getting calls from the Coast Guard already. They're anticipating a bad one, asking about aircraft availability for search and rescue. What did you tell them? That most of the charter services are evacuating their planes inland. Smart money's on getting out of the path, not flying into it. There was a pause, and I could hear the conflict in his voice. Jake was a good pilot and a decent man, but he had a wife and 2 young kids. He couldn't afford to take the risks I once had. Elena, they're specifically asking about pilots with hurricane experience. Your name came up. My name comes up a lot these days, usually followed by words like too old and insurance liability. This is different. This is about people's lives. It's always about people's lives, Jake. That doesn't stop the bureaucrats from making their rules. What if the rules didn't matter? What if it was just about getting people out alive? I looked out at Esperanza again, her wings glinting in the afternoon sun. Hypothetically, I'd say someone would need to be crazy to fly into a Category 5 hurricane. The winds alone would tear most aircraft apart. What about someone with a reinforced Cessna 180? Someone who's done it before. I almost smiled. Jake knew my aircraft specifications better than most mechanics. 3 years ago, I'd had Esperanza modified with additional structural reinforcements and upgraded avionics, preparing for what I thought would be many more years of relief flying. The modifications had cost me nearly $30,000 money I couldn't really afford on my fixed income, but they'd made her one of the most storm-worthy small aircraft on the Gulf Coast. Hypothetically, I said, that someone would still need fuel, weather routing, and ground support. They'd need someone to coordinate with rescue teams and provide real-time weather updates. They'd need backup landing sites and emergency protocols. What if all that could be arranged? The question hung in the air between us. I knew Jake wasn't just making conversation. The Coast Guard was clearly anticipating a disaster, and they were reaching out through unofficial channels to identify resources they might need. It was how these things always worked: official agencies handling the big picture, while private contractors and volunteers filled in the dangerous gaps. Jake, I haven't flown a relief mission in 3 months. My commercial license is tied up in renewal red tape, and my insurance specifically excludes hurricane operations. What about your private license? Still valid. I paused, considering the implications. But if something went wrong? Elena, you've got more experience flying in severe weather than anyone else on the Gulf Coast. You know these barrier islands better than the locals. If people get trapped out there, you might be the only one who can reach them. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up supplies I hoped I wouldn't need. Extra fuel cans, emergency rations, first aid supplies, and a new set of marine charts for the coastal areas most likely to be affected. The hardware store was busy with people buying plywood and batteries, the familiar pre-storm rush of preparation. At the marina, I stopped to talk with Captain Roy Thibodeau, an old Cajun fisherman who'd lived through more hurricanes than anyone. Had a right to survive. He was securing his boat with extra lines, his weathered hands working with practiced efficiency. "You think she's gonna be bad, Roy?" He looked up at the sky, where high cirrus clouds were starting to streak in from the southeast, the first outer bands of the approaching storm. "Maiswe, she's gonna be a mean one. I can feel it in my bones." He straightened, studying my face. "You thinking about flying into her?" Roy knew me well enough to read my intentions. We'd worked together on several rescues over the years, his local knowledge combined with my aerial capabilities. "Depends on what happens. If people get stranded... Boudreaux and me will be here with the boat if you need ground support, long as the water ain't too rough." He gestured toward his nephew, a young man checking fuel lines. "But Elena, this one's different. The weather service, they're scared. I can tell by how they're talking." That evening, I sat in my kitchen with weather charts spread across the table, plotting potential flight paths and emergency landing sites. The storm was following a predictable pattern, but hurricanes were notorious for last-minute changes in direction and intensity. I'd need multiple backup plans for every scenario. My phone buzzed with a text message from Carmen. "Mom, please tell me you're not planning anything dangerous." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, just watching the weather. It wasn't technically a lie. I was watching the weather. I was also calculating fuel loads and reviewing emergency procedures I hadn't used in months. But she didn't need to know that. By 10 p.m., the latest weather update confirmed everyone's worst fears. Hurricane Delilah had intensified to a Category 5, with sustained winds of 165 miles per hour. The storm surge was predicted to reach 20 feet in some areas, and the projected path showed landfall in approximately 36 hours, right in the heart of the most vulnerable coastal communities. I walked outside to check on Esperanza one more time. The wind was already picking up, and I could smell the salt air being pushed inland from the Gulf. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, backlit by occasional flashes of lightning still too distant to hear. My phone rang. It was Jake again. "Elena, I just got off the phone with the Coast Guard Incident Commander. They're officially requesting civilian aviation support for post-storm search and rescue. Are you interested? What's the pay? There isn't any. This would be volunteer work. What about insurance coverage? You'd be operating under emergency authority. The government assumes liability." I looked at Esperanza, her wings now trembling slightly in the increasing wind. "Jake, I'm 62 years old. I've got arthritis in my left knee, my eyes aren't what they used to be, and I haven't flown in severe weather in 6 months. Are you sure I'm who they want for this? Elena, you're the only pilot I know who successfully landed on a barrier island in 60-knot crosswinds. You pulled 12 people off Isle Dernier during Hurricane Rita when everyone else said it was impossible. You know these waters, you know these islands, and you know how to fly in conditions that would kill other pilots. That was 7 years ago. You think you've forgotten how?" I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. It was the same feeling I'd had before every dangerous mission, a mixture of fear and determination, doubt and certainty. I thought about all the people who were probably lying awake tonight, watching weather reports and wondering if they'd made the right decision to stay or go. I thought about the families on remote islands who might not have had a choice, whose escape routes were already cut off by rising water. What exactly are they asking me to do? Stand by for emergency evacuation and rescue operations. If people get trapped in areas that boats can't reach, you'd be their lifeline. In a Category 5 hurricane, after the eye passes. During the calm period before the back wall hits. I knew the window he was talking about, that brief period of relative calm when the hurricane's eye passed over an area. It might last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the storm size and speed. It would be the only opportunity to reach people in the most devastated areas, a narrow gap between catastrophic winds. That's assuming the storm follows predicted patterns. If it slows down or changes direction. Elena, I can't make this decision for you. But I can tell you that there are Coast Guard commanders who remember what you did during Rita and Katrina. They specifically asked for you by name. My hands were shaking slightly as I hung up the phone. Not from fear, I'd learned to manage fear decades ago, but from adrenaline. My body was already preparing for what my mind hadn't yet accepted. I spent the next hour going through Esperanza's pre-flight checklist, checking every system twice. The aircraft was in perfect condition, her engine recently overhauled, and her navigation equipment updated just months before my forced grounding. She was ready to fly, even if I wasn't sure I was done at midnight. I made my decision. I called Jake back. If they want me, I'm in, but I have conditions. Name them. I need complete weather data, real-time radar, and radio contact with ground teams. I need fuel staged at backup airfields, and I need someone coordinating with local boat captains who know these waters. Done. What else? I fly alone. No observers, no media, no government officials along for the ride. This isn't a publicity stunt, understood? And Jake? If I don't make it back, you make sure Carmen knows this was my choice. No one forced me into this. There was a long pause. Elena, you're going to make it back. You always do. We'll see. After I hung up, I sat quietly in my kitchen, listening to the wind building outside. In less than 2 days, I'd either be the pilot who helped save lives during one of the worst hurricanes in Gulf Coast history, or I'd be another casualty of a storm that didn't care about experience, skill, or good intentions. I thought about all the reasons I shouldn't do this my age, the risks, the fact that younger pilots with better equipment had already evacuated their aircraft. Then I thought about the people who were probably huddled in shelters tonight, wondering if help would come if they needed it. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment my entire career, even if I didn't know it at the time. Every hurricane I'd flown through, every dangerous landing I'd made, every rescue mission that seemed impossible, they'd all been training for whatever was coming with Delilah. I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to Carmen, just in case. Mija, if you're reading this, it means the storm was worse than we expected. Outside. The first real bands of wind and rain were beginning to arrive, and somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Delilah was gathering strength for what meteorologists were calling a potentially catastrophic landfall. In 36 hours, I'd find out if being too old to fly was just another bureaucratic limitation, or if experience and determination could still trump youth and regulations when lives hung in the balance. The storm was coming, and ready or not, so was I. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.